Last time I had rambled on about something totally unrelated to the topic at hand. I talked about a story from a few days ago of a player who couldn't quite settle on any of the given templates listed in the Dresden Files RPG. And of course, because I can't help but shove my foot firmly down my throat, I promised that I would talk about the subject of creating your own templates for your own games in this most wonderful of role-playing systems. So, with a promise made yet unfulfilled, allow me to share the alchemist's secrets of the dangerous brew, creating your own templates in the Dresden Files RPG. So, first, what is a template? A template is what we might think of as a class in a more traditional role-playing game like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder. But that wouldn't be entirely accurate. You see, a template isn't really necessary, nor is it fully, how do I put this, a good mark of what exactly it is you want to do. Some of them have barely any kind of restrictions for how to actually play the character or even what kind of powers you possess. Looking at the Emissary of Power first and foremost, the only real requirement for that one is that you have made a bargain with some kind of supernatural being at some point. So, if templates aren't strictly necessary, why do we use them? Well, honestly, two reasons. First, it makes bringing people in from other more popular role-playing games like those I'd mentioned easier to integrate in. The simple explanation of a template as a class is usually good enough. Secondly, the templates provide structure to all of the powers presented in the Your Story book, as they kind of just force the powers into a way that makes sense with the Dresden verse, such as the Champion of God representing the Knights of the Cross, or Were forms representing Billy and the Alphas. So, now that we know the basics, what exactly is a template? Well, the mechanical musts of a template, it's kind of arranged as follows. A template, if you will. Usually it'll tell you about some kind of restriction on your high concept. A changeling, for instance, must allude to his fairy blood in his high concept. Let's go with half-troll pizza boy as his high concept. A template will also sometimes have mechanical requirements in powers. In the case of our changeling, they need to work with the GM to select a list of powers that he can take later. There's never any skill requirements, I found, poring over it. You don't need a specific ranking in any skill, but the templates in the book will usually tell you which skills are very important for these. Such as a wizard needing a high conviction and lore if he wants to passively imitate the wizards presented in the novels you see behind me. The last thing it'll usually give you is some additional supernatural power options to kind of play around with. In the case of Champion of God, you don't need to have a Sword of the Cross, but it tells you that, hey, this is a really cool thing that works with what you've selected, and here's the page number to find it on. Which is awesome. I really like it in RPGs when they reference what page something is on every single time it comes up. It's beautiful. So now let's get to the example. The person I talked about, the player, had found the World Walker power on page 171 of Your Story. The World Walker is a power that lets you open portals into the Never Never, or the fairy world, and back once per scene. So, like, every time you switch where the characters are every time an important thing happens, they can do that. So normally, I would say, oh, well, just pick the Emissary of Power, and we'll say you made a deal with somebody to get this. But two things. First, we don't really allow the Emissary of Power in the campaign that's going to be starting for reasons I don't want to get into. And secondly, the character wouldn't have made a deal with any sort of fae or supernatural entity. They're supposed to be very familiar with the trappings of such deals. So, with all of that, let's take a look at how to actually build this template using the World Walker power as the basis for it. So, like I said, page 171 of your story, it's World Walker. The ability costs 2 refresh, and it lets you see where the mortal reality is weakest, allowing you to open portals for a few seconds into the Never Never. In addition, it gives you a skill bonus to lore and survival checks regarding the Never Never, and it lets you use lore to navigate it instead of another skill like survival. So this is a really cool, really powerful ability. I really like it, and it could make for a very interesting character. So let's assume that our template only requires this supernatural power. How do we make it into a template? Well, it needs its high concept, it needs maybe an option or two to tie into it, and it needs a suggestion on which skills are appropriate for it. And it's going to need a cool name. Now, the character, or the player, suggested Friend of the Fae while we were shooting ideas back and forth, and I don't really like that. I don't think it's dramatic enough, so we're going to name it the World Walker after the power. So, to arrange it in the actual core rulebook, it would be labeled as first musts. A World Walker must take a high concept, indicating they are a traveler of mystic places, such as plain-striding explorer or walker of the ways. In addition, World Walkers must take the following supernatural power. World Walker, -2 refresh, page 171, your story. Options, in addition, a World Walker might choose to contain their ability to an item of power, refresh varies, your story 167. Important skills, investigation, page 133. Lore, 134. Survival, 143. Minimum refresh, -2. It's as simple as that. It might have sounded complicated when I listed the example, but really, honestly, and truly, it's just scrolling through the books, skimming them. Even the first book, Your Story, is good enough for it. Piecing some powers, or even just one power, into a story structure, figuring out what exactly it does, and then naming it and letting your players take it. As a closing note, I said earlier, templates aren't even necessary for the game. My player could have very well have just chosen World Walker as an ability without using a template. They're just convenient packages that helps you create a character quickly and easily that also happens to fit in with the Dresden verse. If you are an experienced group, or you have players that really like to go for the bizarre, skip the templates. Go straight to the Supernatural Powers chapter on page 157 of your story, and go bananas. Thank you very much for watching.